أهلا بكم في السنة الاقتصادية. في إطار تغطيتنا لمبادرة مستقبل استثمار نستضيف النائب للمفوض السامي للأمم المتحدة لشؤون اللاجئين السيدة كليمنتس. Thank you for being here, Mrs. Clements. So, Mrs. Clements, new and protracted crises are creating bigger challenges, especially on most vulnerable communities and the forcibly displaced. Can you give us a glimpse on what kind of humanitarian assistance we need today?
So we're seeing today the largest forcibly displaced population in the world in recent history. 110 million people are on the move. They're on the move for conflict, persecution, now climate-related reasons, and inequalities of all sorts. They need all kinds of support, and from every part of the globe, we see people that are in need. From the Rohingya in coming out of Myanmar to Afghans seeking protection in Pakistan and in Iran, in Venezuela, and here in the Middle East, as well as Ukraine. These are situations where people need a place to stay safely and securely. They need to be able to support themselves and their families. They need to put their kids in school. They need to find ways to be able to find health services and be able to deal with deep trauma. Because this is when people are picking up everything and moving at a moment's notice. They sometimes lose family members and they lose all their possessions. And so to be able to help them, to be able to rebuild as quickly as possible is the first priority.
So do you as a humanitarian organization have the resources to provide these people, these forcibly displaced and vulnerable people with humanitarian needs and assistance?
Well, there's a record amount of need across the globe right now. The United Nations needs more than $55 billion in terms of being able to support humanitarian crises. For the UN Refugee Agency, that's $11 billion. That means, these kinds of basic supports to not only help people to survive, but also to thrive. And for UNHCR, we are only 40 to 45% subscribed. This is coming not just from governments, including those here in the region, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but it's also keenly the private sector and individual givers. And that kind of support from a whole multitude of actors is absolutely essential for us to be able to not only provide humanitarian protection and aid, but to be able to provide solutions. And of course, political solutions are right at the top of the list. And for that, we need member states.
Mrs. Clements, how are conflicts in the Middle East, especially the rising conflict, affecting most vulnerable communities and their need for humanitarian assistance?
Right, of course, what's happening right now is in Gaza is tragic, absolutely tragic. For the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, we don't have a mandate in terms of response there, but importantly, we have a large operation for the rest of the Middle East, including in Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. And this kind of support, we see, for example, with the Syrians who have been displaced and refugees now for a dozen years. And this kind of displacement both internally but also externally. There are now 12 to 13 million people either displaced inside Syria but also refugees, importantly to Jordan and to Lebanon, Iraq and Egypt. And these are areas where they need our support. They need the United Nations but also partners. In addition, for example, to Yemen, you have 24 to 26 million people that remain in need of humanitarian aid. The conflict continues. Our support and those of many partners inside Yemen trying to provide relief, protection, and aid to displaced, but also refugees that have sought protection from Yemen during those years, Somalis and Sudanese in particular. And now, of course, very close to where we are is the Sudan crisis. This is the most recent crisis that, of course, consumes so much of our attention. It's barely received any attention from the international community. Right now, 6 months, 6 million people. And that is, 5 million people internally, newly displaced who haven't left Sudan, but 1 million refugees now going to neighbors that don't have the resources to be able to support them adequately. They need our support and they need much more support from the region. These situations, of course, will continue to demand a whole lot of attention and resources from the international community. And we, of course, need to be there to be able to support.
Mrs. Clements, what message would you like to send the world about the necessity of finding sustainable solutions in order to serve the most vulnerable communities?
We can't think of the forcibly displaced or of refugees as over there. You know, refugees are part of our communities. Refugees need to be included in the services that the hosts are trying to provide, and those hosts need support as well. So we need to be looking at displacement as something that is not just an immediate relief, but we have to be looking for those solutions. We need to find ways for families to be able to support themselves. We need to ensure that we're taking care of the needs of a future generation. And that sort of thinking, I think, you know, requires a whole of society approach. Requires governments, international organizations, civil society, refugees at the heart, businesses, the private sector, international financial institutions. Together is the only way that we're going to be able to make a difference and enable refugees and those that are being hosted from them to feel supported and a future.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Clements, for your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
شكرا لحسن المتابعة وإلى اللقاء.